Hey, it's Jen Healy, and I'm coming back with day 4 of the Fearless Challenge that I'm also calling Be Brave. And I want to talk to you today about a spiritual experience I had when I was 24. So this is way different than the near-death experience that I had that I shared last time in day 3. But yeah, when I was 24, on my 24th birthday, which is fascinating that these things come up around birthday times, but I was in a place of experiencing a lot of pain and suffering, and I was by myself walking around in the desert. At that point, I was living in Tucson, Arizona in grad school, and for long story short, I was having a little pity party for myself that I was spending my birthday by myself and no one was there, and I've been on my own for such a long time. At that point, I had been on my own for 10 years and I don't have much family or much relationship to family. And it was so fascinating because in that moment, Spirit started talking to me directly. And this is the second time that something like this happened. First time, I told you with that near-death experience that I was sitting in the lap of God and God was directly having a conversation with me. And again, I did not grow up religious or spiritual or anything like that in Philadelphia. But when I was in grad school, after 2 weeks of starting grad school, I wound up tearing my ACL. And then 6 months later, tearing the other ACL. So within the first year of going to graduate school for my PhD in electrical engineering and physics, I was going through 2 major reconstructive surgeries on both my knees. I'd been an athlete for a very long time, but this was a pretty traumatic experience, and it propelled me into studying more of medical physics and getting into alternative therapies to find other ways of healing the body. So after dedicating my educational career to engineering and physics, I wound up switching over to the healing arts after this spiritual awakening, because I walked around for 6 months with Spirit talking to me and me asking Spirit all kinds of questions. I could ask Spirit anything and everything. And I didn't tell too many people about this because at that time, back in the 90s, you were considered loony if you heard voices in your head that were telling you to do things. And so I really kept this to myself. Only my closest friends did I actually have a conversation with and say, I have this direct line on Source and Spirit is talking to me, and they would encourage me to not tell anybody that I was having that experience. So I was like, okay. But after about a year of being I was finishing up grad school, but in my last year of grad school, after about a year of having this connection to Spirit explained to me that I'm actually here to be part of a whole new evolution in science and medicine coming together, creating a whole new energy medicine. And that even though I love science and technology and math, that I'm actually here to be part of this spiritual revolution, and that I'm a natural healer. And at this time, even though my last name is Healy, that never even crossed my mind. I had a lot of, we'll just say, interpersonal skill issues. I worked mainly in a lab by myself, and people would email me, and I spent, again, a lot of time alone, bike riding out in the desert. And so the idea of interacting with people in such a deep, intimate way was so super scary to me. So then, of course, I tried to do some negotiating with God, with Spirit, and saying, well, what if I just focus on technologies that are used for the healing arts? And they were like, no, you're here to work directly with people, and we're encouraging you to move to San Francisco. This is one of the meccas. This is a place where there is the New Thought movement, and the healing arts and spirituality are thriving. And from the age of 22, when all of these knee surgeries started, to the age of 24, I had been studying all the major forms of alternative therapies and all of the spiritual teachers, and diving deep as I do into anything that I put my mind to. So I've been an overachiever in the scholastic world, and so I just shifted to overachieving in the spiritual world, where I was reading every book I could get my hand on. I was studying every modality, and this was really only for my own path and my own healing. But it was really necessary for me to open up this door to a world that I wasn't familiar with. In my world previously, it was work hard, play hard, right? So it was mind, body. And I had highly developed myself in both the physical and the mental. And then there was the spiritual and emotional. And if it was a bar chart, the spiritual was just like a tiny little sliver, and so was the emotional. So I really started to dive into becoming a whole being, a whole person, and to dedicate my life to the spiritual path, and not only developing myself in this way, always leading me first into the healing arts, but also to share that wisdom, because what I learned and what I was gaining could help other people to avoid having major surgeries or avoid having major health issues before there was an understanding and a realization of what the body was actually telling us, the messenger of the body, and then how we're going to interpret that. So part of this practice was facing all of my deepest, darkest fears. And so at the age of 25, I left with my master's instead of my PhD and transferred to Berkeley for a little while. We'll bookmark that. And I started, instead of going into engineering and physics, I started studying yoga and massage and meditation and all different kinds of body work, and found some really wonderful people and places in the Bay Area where I could do that. And that was really quite extraordinary. But to give up my identity, to give up my degrees, to give up all of my education and start like a whole nother trajectory was really scary. So on this video, I wanted to talk about how do we face our fears, and when they come up, what is the identity that we have that is attached to them. So my identity as an engineer and a physicist was so different than the way people treat somebody who is a massage therapist or a yoga teacher. I went through many years. I went through 5 or 6 years not even telling anyone about my advanced degrees in engineering and physics. I basically just hid that part of my identity because I didn't want to lead with credentials that would color people's experience, and I wanted to see what it was like to take on a whole new persona. And it was quite the psychological experiment. But really the fears that I was facing was my own ability to show up and interact with people and be so close and intimate with others as the healing space requires. And even 25 years later, as I'm celebrating the 25th anniversary of Zen healing and healing technologies, I still every day have this growing edge of how am I showing up? Am I showing up fully? Can I be fully present? Is there anything else that I can learn or that I can offer, not only for my own growth and healing, but for me to be the best practitioner and therapist for the clients that come to me? So I'm always stretching myself, and I'm always growing myself, expanding my toolbox so I have more to give and more to offer. But it really comes down to what I call intimacy. But that word can be used in many, many ways. We have physical intimacy, we have emotional intimacy, but we also have spiritual intimacy. And most of the work that I do these days, after 25 years, it evolves, are soul sessions where I would love to offer to every single person the same relationship and the same communication to spirit that I was granted and that I was gifted. But to have that spiritual intimacy is so deep and so real. So that's how I stretch myself each day to be brave and to overcome my fears, is to show up in that way. And eventually on this 30-day challenge, I will offer you guys one of my Source Speaks transmissions live and share with you more of my meditation practices that I've developed. But for now, I'm going to leave it at that. That is day 4 of the spiritual awakening and facing fear. I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.